Howdy Moz fans, and welcome to another edition of Whiteboard Friday. Today, we're going to chat about something a little interesting, how content can succeed by making enemies. I know you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I thought my job was to make friends with my content. Yes, and one of the best ways to make close friends is to make enemies too. So, in my opinion, I think that companies and businesses, programs, organizations of all kinds, efforts of all kinds, tend to do really well when they get people on your side, right? So if I'm trying to create a movement, or I'm trying to get people to, believe in what I'm doing, I need to have, positions, data, stories, and content that can bring people to my side. And one of the best ways to do that is actually to think about it in opposition to something else. Basically, try and figure out how you can earn some enemies. I'll give you a few examples because I think that'll help add some context here. So I did a little bit of research. My shared data is from BuzzSumo and my linked data here is from Ahrefs. But for example, this piece called "There are now twice as many solar jobs as coal jobs in the US." This is essentially just data-driven content, but it clearly makes friends and enemies, right? It makes enemies with sort of this, classic old-school Americana belief set around how important coal jobs are, and it creates, through the enemy that it builds around that, right? Simply by sharing data, it also creates allies, people who are on the side of this story, who want to share it and amplify it and have it reach its potential and reach more people. Same is true here. So this is a story called "Yoga is a Good Alternative to Physical Therapy." Clearly did extremely well, right? Tens of thousands of shares and thousands of links, lots of ranking keywords for it. But it creates some enemies. Physical therapists are not going to be thrilled that this is the case, despite the research behind it, right? This is frustrating for many of those folks. So you've created friends, right? Allies, people who are yoga practitioners and yoga instructors. You've also created enemies, potentially those folks who don't believe that this might be the case, despite what the research might show. Third one, the 50 most powerful public relations firms in America. I think this was actually from The Observer. So they're writing in the UK, but they managed to rank for lots and lots of keywords around, best PR firms and all this sorts of thing. They have, thousands of shares, thousands of links. 11,000 links. That's darn impressive for a story of this nature. And they've created enemies, right? They've created enemies of all the people who are not in the 50 most powerful who feel that they should be. And they've created allies of the people who are in there. They also created some allies and enemies deeper inside this story, which you can check out. Replace your lawn with these superior alternatives. Well, guess what? You have now created some enemies in the lawn care world and in the lawn supply world, and in the passionate communities, very passionate communities, especially here in the United States, around people who sort of believe that homes should have lawns and nothing else. Grass lawns in this case. This piece didn't do that well in terms of shares, but did phenomenally well in terms of links. This was on Lifehacker, and it ranks for all sorts of things, right? 11,000 plus links. So you can see that these might not be things that you naturally think of as earning enemies, but when you're creating content, if you can go through this exercise, right? I have this rule that I've talked about many times over the years for content success, especially content amplification success, and that is before you ever create something. So before you brainstorm the idea, come up with a title, come up with the content, before you do that, ask yourself, who will help amplify this and why? Why will they help? And one of the great things about framing things in terms of who are my allies, the people on my side, and who are the enemies I'm going to create is that the who becomes much more clear, right? The people who support your ideas, your ethics, your position, your logic, your data, and want to help amplify that, those are people who are potential amplifiers. And the people right? The detractors, the enemies that you're going to build help you often to identify that group. The why becomes much more clear too, right? The existence of that common enemy, the chance to show that you have support and beliefs and people, that's a powerful catalyst for that amplification, for the behavior you're attempting to drive in your community and your content consumers. And this, I found that thinking about it this way often gets content creators and SEOs in the right frame of mind to build stuff that can do really well. A few do's and don'ts if you're pursuing this path of content generation and ideation. Do back up as much as you can with facts and data, not just opinion. That should be relatively obvious, but it can be dangerous in this kind of world, as you go down this path, to not do that. I do suggest that you try and convey a worldview, not necessarily, if you're thinking on the political spectrum of from all the way left to all the way right or those kinds of things. I think it's okay to convey a worldview around it, but I would urge you to provide multiple angles of appeal, right? So if you're saying, hey, you should replace your lawn with these superior alternatives, don't make it purely that it's about conservation and ecological health. You can also make it about financial responsibility. You can also make it about the ease with which you can care for these lawns versus other ones, right? So now it becomes something that appeals across a broader range of the spectrum. Same thing with something like solar jobs versus coal jobs, right? If you can get it to be economically focused and you can give it a capitalist bent, you can potentially appeal to multiple ends of the ideological spectrum with that worldview. Third, I would urge you to get inputs from notable folks before you create and publish this content, especially if the issue that you're talking about is going to be culturally or socially or politically charged. Some of these fit into that, yoga probably not so much, but potentially, the solar jobs, coal jobs one, that might be something to run the actual content that you created by some folks who are in the energy space so that they can help you along those lines, potentially the energy and political space if you can. Some don'ts. I do not urge you, and I'm not suggesting that you should create provocative content purely to be provocative. Instead, I'm urging you to think about the content that you create and how you angle it using this framing of mind, rather than saying okay, what could we say that would really piss people off? That's not what I'm urging you to do. I'm urging you to say, how can we take things that we already have, beliefs and positions, data, stories, whatever content, and how do we angle them such a way that we think about who are the enemies, who are the allies, how do we get that buy-in, how do we get that amplification? Second, I would not choose enemies or positions that you can't defend against. So for example, if you are considering a path that you think might get you into a world of litigious danger, you should probably stay away from that. And likewise, if your positions are relatively undefensible and you've talked to some folks in the field and done this dues, and they're like, I don't know about that, you might not want to pursue it. Third, do not give up if your first attempts in this framing, sorts of framing don't work. You should expect that you will have to, just like any other form of content, practice, iterate, and do this multiple times before you have success. Don't be unprofessional when you do this type of content. It can be a little bit tempting when you're framing things in terms of, how do I make enemies out of this, to get on the attack, and that is not necessary. I think that actually content that builds enemies does so even better when it does it from a non-attack vector mode. And sixth, don't forget that if you're getting some haterade for the content you create, a lot of people, when they start drinking the haterade online, they run, right? They think, okay, we've done something wrong. That's actually not the case. In my experience, that means you're doing something right. You're building something special. People don't tend to fight against and argue against ideas and people and organizations for no reason, right? They do so because they're a threat. And if you've created a threat to your enemies, you have also generally created something special for your allies and the people on your side, and that means you're doing something right. In Moz's early days, I can tell you, back when we were called SEO Moz, right? For years and years and years, we got all sorts of hate, and it was actually a pretty good sign that we were doing something right, that we were building something special. So I look forward to your comments. I'd love to see any examples of stuff that you have as well, and we'll see you again next week for another edition of Whiteboard Friday. Take care.